Okay, hi everyone, and welcome to the Secrets of CRM Success Data and Data Quality Strategies. This is the second webinar in the four-part series. I'm Stephanie Marone, and I'm so excited to be here today with Chris and with Whit. And I am, I guess, like your MC. So some of you may know me. I've been in the legal industry for quite some time, and Whit and Chris are good friends of mine. So I'm going to just, sort of introduce the topic and introduce the speakers. I've put a couple resources in the chat for you. There are links to link in with Chris and with Whit. I hope you'll do that. And the third program of this series is going to be on March 9th, which is like crazy to me that March is not that far away. And we hope you'll register for that as well. So the link is in the chat. So I think the next slide, we can move to the next slide. Okay, cool. So this is, like I said, a four-part educational webinar series, and the first was Law Firm CRM Success, which is for law firms of all sizes, and this is so important for firms of 5 lawyers to firms of 2,000 or above. And that recording is available upon request. So again, if you would like that, just message us, put it in the chat. You can reach out to any of the speakers as well. Today's topic is about data and data quality strategies. The third is about training communications, reporting, and dashboards. Again, a really important topic. And then we've got rollout and user adoption strategies, which will be at a date TBD. Okay, so we can move on, I think, to the next slide. Okay, so just to tell you guys just a little bit about me, I know the speakers. It's interesting, I'll tell you about it in a second. I've been working in this industry for 20 years. I was marketing in-house person at Proskauer and Sullivan and Cromwell, Paul Weiss, Mayer Brown, Mofo, and then I was the CMO of a mid-sized firm where I had to learn how to do more with less. And I actually was a client of Chris's where I said, Chris, I need help with my data. It was also not just client data, but alumni data, which is, I hope you're thinking about managing your alumni data and finding your alumni because they are so important for your referral relationships and your recruiting and everything for business development. So, keep in mind your alumni are a huge part of your pipeline initiative. So Chris actually helped me with that. And I would tell you that if you are at a smaller mid-sized firm, outsourcing is so important to what you do. And even if you're at a big firm, managing your data is tantamount to the success of any business development program, any webinar you do, any business development activity, because if you're any client alert, anything, if you're trying to reach people and you don't have good data, you're not going to reach them. And so it's all for naught, basically. So that's what I learned. And at the heart of everything that any marketer does at a law firm is good data. So you need to be in constant communication with your CRM team. And these folks are going to talk about how to do that effectively. So now I work with law firms and legal service providers and a whole bunch of other kinds of companies on marketing, communication strategies, and things like that. So Whit is the founder of Legal360, which is now part, as he explained to me, of HSO ProServe. And he's been doing this, he told me, for, I think it was 800 years, Whit, is that what you said? Something like that. And so he's got the gray hair to prove it, like we all do. And so Whit actually has been doing this for about 30 years in legal tech. And he's worked with 4,000 law firms, which I was like astounded when I saw that in his bio. And what I think is really interesting, and actually a funny story, Whit, I don't know if you remember this, but I met you at a conference, and also you came into my office years ago at Chris's recommendation to talk to me about a CRM solution to a CRM that we had that had gone defunct. And I wanted to work with you, but the firm just couldn't get their stuff together, which was to their detriment. And luckily I left. But what I liked about it was that the CRM system that you have is on the Microsoft Dynamics platform. So that was great. So you never know, guys, this industry is really small.
Right?
Yeah, so it's great. So Whit has a lot of experience that he's going to share with us. And
it's funny too, you were a client of mine and now I'm a client of yours.
You never know, right? Be nice to everybody, I guess.
Indeed.
So Chris Fritsch, I would say, is like the godfather, godmother, god person of CRM. And everything you want to know about CRM, you ask her essentially. So Chris has also been doing this for a really long time. And she's a consultant that basically I would say is like, I would call you, Chris, the general counsel of CRM. And I don't know if anyone's ever said that to you, but I think that's like
Never heard that
a
one.
really great way. Not only do you have a JD, but I would say, you know, a general counsel's job is to like put all the pieces together for their clients. And that's exactly what I would describe you as, somebody who does that. Chris works with hundreds of law firms from all sizes around the country to find the right CRM system. So I called her up one day and I said, I need a CRM system. What do I do? I need to manage my alumni data. And she helped me with that. And so it's not just CRM, it's also email, e-marketing solutions. You can find Chris, you know, writing about topics, speaking everywhere, and really kind of distilling down and helping marketers and business development professionals make sense of all their data to get ROI on the information they have. And so she has, I think it's like 100 or so data quality folks who really know what they're doing to help firms clean and enhance their data and make sure that it's quality info. Because like I said, you can have hundreds of records, thousands of records, but if you don't have good information, you might as well just not be doing any marketing at all. So all these great ideas you have won't come to fruition if you don't have good data. So,
and that's why we're having this session today.
Yeah. So having been on that side of things, I can tell you, you know, all about the pain points. So these are all the awesome things that these folks are going to be talking about today. And so I'm going to turn it over to Chris to lead us in the discussion. And guys, if you have questions, put them in the chat. We're going to save some time at the end for the for Q&A. So I can't wait to learn from you guys. So Chris, I'm going to throw it over to you.
Sounds great. So I don't think I've been doing this quite as long as Whit, but I have been doing this almost 20 years this year. And I've had the company for 15 years, and every client in working together with them on CRM, every single client had an issue with data quality, which is sort of how we got into the data quality business. So let's go ahead and kick off the next slide. And there are all kinds of challenges, right? So like Stephanie said, there's nothing you can do without good data, but everybody has a problem with it. So, you know, problems include we don't have any data, or we have too much data, or data is everywhere. It's in spreadsheets, it's in databases, it's in people's heads, it's in their Outlook. And if it's in Outlook, it's typically dated and it's incorrect and incomplete. And we run into just a ton of different data quality challenges, duplicative data. And so we'll go through some of that. Next slide. So we've got also communications data, lists data. You have to think about all the different places that the data lives. You know, so many firms have so many lists and they're sending things out and the data degrades pretty quickly and they've got a lot of bounces. And people typically either leave them on the list and they continue to bounce, which can cause you to get blacklisted as a spammer, or they just pull them out, and they're gone and they don't bother to research them. So bounces are really sort of a treasure trove that a lot of firms, you know, should focus more on. Then you've got, of course, incorrect and incomplete. We don't have the information there we need, or we've got orphan records. So, you know, the contacts belong to an attorney who left the firm 10 years ago. They're still in the database. They're not on any list. They don't have any activity, but there they are still cluttering up the database. And then, of course, you know, missing information that you really need. You know, we used to think, I don't really need address data. What do I need that for? I don't mail things anymore. And then GDPR and all of the global privacy regs hit. And suddenly we need to know what country they're in. And then COVID hit. And we're sending things to people's homes. And we certainly didn't have that information. So there's a lot of bad data. And on top of that, data typically used to degrade at, the researchers would say, about 30% per year. So, you know, think about it. People change jobs, they get promoted, they change locations, they get married and divorced, some retire and others die. Businesses, new businesses, businesses closing, getting acquired and merging, getting new locations. 30% before COVID. Now, I'd say in the last few years, it could be 50%. All of our data is bad. You know, if we had people in their offices and they're no longer in their offices, they're now at home, the great resignation, people have changed jobs and resigned. I bet the data is 55 or 60% changing per year. And that is evidenced by the fact that almost 100% of people think that their data is probably not that great. And every year it gets worse. I'm not going to read these stats to you. You have access to the slides, but these are just, a lot of things changing all the time. And what does this mean? Why do we care? Well, we know that if we don't have good data as an attorney, I can tell you, if the data is bad, the system is bad, and I will not be using the system. So you lose adoption. That's a big key thing. You lose ROI. The attorneys are skeptical of the system, and then it just snowballs from there. But you also cannot complete a campaign. You can't get the right people to your events. I said that to a really smart managing partner. You spend this money on events, and I had a firm we worked with that wanted to get a few hundred people. They sent out a few thousand invitations. They figured maybe 200 people would attend. They had 40 attorneys there and all the staff, and 20 people showed up. It's an embarrassment to the firm, more so than the money spent on the event. And he said, yeah, I get that. But if you think about all of the time and all of the effort that we spend on speaking and writing, if we can't get that information out to the right audience, think about how much billable time we've spent on that. So that's even, if you think about it, that's an even bigger bad effect of bad data. And of course, client service issues, your analytics are wrong. We're trying to track ROI. We're trying to do pitches and proposals and opportunity tracking. And if we don't keep up with the right people, we just can't do that. And really, we're trying to use this data to make smart decisions. But if we have bad data, ultimately, we're going to make some bad decisions. So there's a lot of different data issues our data team encounters. It's a lot of invalid information. Back in the day, we used to think that in a law firm, things are a little different. So if you start at a company, you get access to the CRM, great, you log in and there are the contacts. It doesn't work that way in a law firm. We're a little bit inside out. The contacts come and go with the attorneys who come and go from the firm. And so we used to think, well, where are those contacts? They're in Outlook. So we've got to bring those in. I think we've had such a data explosion in the last decade that I talk to attorneys, and not just associates, who just don't use Outlook contacts anymore in their address books. I said, what do you do? I mean, how do you keep up with your contacts? And they literally say, well, I go to Outlook, but I find the last email and I hit reply. Or I go to the signature block and I dial the phone and talk to them. And that's all they do. And over a period of years, they get more and more and more contacts for those that do keep them. And they've just said, it's overloaded. I can't even keep up with it anymore, so I don't bother. I have probably 5,000 records in my Outlook. Do I know them all? I might have at one time. Do I know them all equally well? Certainly not. Are some of them in there that are probably changed jobs or even retired or died? Absolutely. It's very hard to keep up with. So the whole methodology for should we pull Outlook contacts in, maybe has had over the past few years, and will continue to think of other options for that. So what does this cost us? We talked about some of the effects, but what are the actual costs? So these are statistics. They're all over the internet. The respected researchers have said, and they like to predict the gloom and doom, but $3 trillion. 40% of objectives fail due to bad data, and I think a lot of these people that are researchers use this to promote their research. But we all know it's true. You spend a lot of time dealing with bad data, trying to. Biggest complaint in a law firm: why can't we just get a good, clean, correct, complete list? It doesn't sound that hard. Why can't I pull a list of our energy clients? And you have to tell them, the CRM isn't magic. It doesn't know that someone's a client just because it's been added. Someone's got to tag that. It doesn't know that they're in the energy industry unless you buy a data subscription or you have your data stewards add that information and tag that. That's not how it works. And, I don't think it's just not part of the explanation process, but they get frustrated because it seems so easy, but really there's a lot going on here. And again, one of the other things super important in the last 5 years or so is data privacy regulations. If you don't comply with GDPR, there are significant penalties. Now, I gather, I get that law was primarily aimed at large software companies and other people, who are dealing with spamming organizations and individuals. But the law firms have taken this really seriously, and it's a really big deal. So now we've got to be able to keep up with, not just who do we know, but who's where. And what a company may be somewhere and the employees may be all over the place. And so how do we make sure that we're not running afoul of global privacy regulations? Even in the US, there are a couple now and more to come. So that's a new implication of bad data.
Chris, nothing makes me happier than to hear you educating the marketplace on the importance of the data scenario, because of course, in our business, everybody wants to talk about bells and whistles and software functionality and stuff like that. But the reality of it is, if there's not good data, it doesn't matter how good your technology is, it doesn't matter what type of user adoption you try to drive. So I thought this was an interesting piece of information, which is 64% of data-driven marketers say that improving data quality is not one of, it is the most important obstacle to overcome with their implementations. And that's significant, and not enough people focus on the importance of this scenario as they're embarking on these CRM implementations.
Yeah, it's absolutely true, Whit. But there's some good news about the importance of focusing on data. Organizations that clean their data report increased revenue. And I don't know if it's 70%, but again, these are stats from all over the place, not just marketing data. But certainly being able to better target, is going to bring in more revenue. And frankly, in a law firm, if we can't effectively share information about what the lawyers do and changes in the law and their expertise and experience, we can't develop business. So without, a core base of good data to market to, we can't set them up for success in business development. The other thing, if nothing else convinces anybody, it's less than $1 to verify a record when it's entered. It's negligible. $10 to scrub it or clean it later, and $100 if nothing gets done. I like these stats because it shows you the long-term implications of having bad data, making bad decisions, not reaching the right people, not closing that deal, not getting that new work because you had the wrong information, the wrong person got invited and the right person didn't. So the sooner you start, the better off you'll be and the less it will cost. So how do you do it? Well, first you start with a strategy. And again, when we're talking about starting with putting in good data to begin with, starting with consistent styles and standards, so we are not creating duplicates, we're not entering things in different ways, focusing on training. So when we work with a client, the first thing we do is create a standard and styles guide, and we'll have a call with a client and they're just amazed that the call to put together the style guide can take an hour and a half, because there's 22 pages of different things that need to be consistent and need to be thought about. What is your firm style going to be? But if you have a good style, that will inform your data stewards, because if they're merging records and the records are in different styles, like one person's abbreviating street and one person's spelling it out, what do you do? Well, you've got to figure out what's the firm style. How do you do addresses? How do you do naming conventions and lots of different things? How do you deal with out of business companies and retired folks? That's a big part of it. And then you've got to train anybody who's entering the data. It could be attorneys, could be assistants, could be the marketing and BD team on consistent entering information consistently and using those styles, or that if they're not doing the data, at least understand, if they're going to see it, that the data team that the firm typically hires is going to making that information consistent and why it's important. And that's why you have data stewards. So, in legal, I think we totally understand the importance of data stewarding. A lot of firms learn the importance of data stewarding kind of after the fact. I had a managing partner say to me, well, why didn't the CRM person tell us that we needed a data steward? I said, well, it's not really a good way to sell software, but it's also, it's a challenging thing. Some firms need more data stewarding. And the nice thing is, with technology, I think we've been able to reduce the amount of data stewarding. I don't think we'll ever eliminate it. I had a client that said, we thought we could use an ERM, and Whit's gonna talk a lot more about ERM, and we thought we could just let the data flow in. She said, we figured out that we couldn't when we realized that one of our clients abbreviates assistant as ASS, and we populated the database with Ask General Counsel, and our attorney saw it, and that was the end of that. So at least there's always going to be a little bit of data stewarding that goes on. And if we can leverage technology, which we can do now more than ever, and again, Whit's going to talk more about that, some of these tools, that will help us a lot. It'll reduce the amount of data stewarding, and that's always a good thing. Anything we can automate, we love. So we've talked about a lot. It's already sort of drinking from the data fire hose. Where do we start? Because again, it can be daunting. Don't try to think of getting 100% data quality, because if tomorrow, you had cleaned your entire database and you had no bad data, your interaction folks, you had no tickets, in 5 minutes you would. That's how quickly it changes. So don't let the in law firms, the perfect is the enemy of the good. Oh, we can't get it exactly right, so let's not do it. No, break it down into small, manageable pieces and start with an assessment. So when you work with clients, the first thing we say, let's assess the mess. You don't need to clean it all. Let's be respectful of your budget and figure out what are the high priority places to start, top clients, people on lists for the seminar next week. Figure out, base your budget on where you're going to get the most bang for your data quality buck, so to speak. And what can we automate? How can we allocate resources to handle this? And then how will we put in, after we've got it all clean, because I've got a lot of clients we work with, it's been 10 years since they've done any data quality at all. Where can we start now? And then once we get to a good point, how do we make sure we never get into this place again? So it all starts with the assessment. Yeah. So the assessments can be automated or manual, depending on your system and what you're trying to accomplish. But they're going to look at things like, how many duplicate records do you have? Are you missing information that you really need? Emails, GDPR, you need country information. Depending, you may need phone numbers, you may not, depending on what you're doing with your data. What about those bounces? What are we doing with them? Some of these people who are their communications are bouncing, they've gone to another company. They were a really big, referral source or client, and now they're gone and we didn't know about it. Do we just pull them out or do we go look for them? Let's figure out where they went, especially if they're client, personnel, and we want to find out where they are now, because they might be a really nice entree to some new business. Information in the wrong fields, people with no companies, and then anything that relates to compliance issues with GDPR, the country codes and things like that. Whether someone has unsubscribed, we need to make sure that we keep them off of publications because they've asked to be kept off. That's a big compliance issue. And then orphan contacts. Somebody's left the firm, their contacts are still there. For those, what you really need is an offboarding process where you sit down with another attorney from the group and see which of those contacts can be passed to someone else who can sort of nurture those relationships rather than just cleaning them out of the database. So now you've looked at the mess. What are your top priorities? You've seen, how much bad data you have. You've kind of estimated how long it would take to clean it up. You've got to analyze also data coming in so that you're not getting bad data in the system. So once it's in there, you've got to clean it up, but hey, let's try to prevent it from getting in there. And how do you do that? Well, where is the data coming from? our clients that we talk to, it's coming from all over the place. Integrations from other systems. So you've got data coming in from HR and Active Directory. You've got time and billing integrations. And anybody who's ever looked at the data in the time and billing system, they've all been scared by it. It's a lot worse than the CRM. So you really have to think. I had a client years ago that someone advised them, oh, just turn on the time and billing integration and just bring all those companies in. Yeah, look at Whit. He shakes his head. They realized they do a lot of real estate work, and some of them were entered in the time and billing system instead of the organization real estate company name. It was apartment complex on the corner of Main and 6th Street, residential development in Atlanta, Georgia. And you go in the database and there's 200,000 now of these companies that are not companies, they're addresses. And the attorneys immediately notice it because we tend to pay attention to things. So you've got to be really careful about how you bring in time and billing data, and maybe just bring it in a little at a time. Don't try to bring in all the time and billing data, just top clients, maybe the top 200 by revenue or some other qualifier. So think about your integration. When somebody leaves, are we immediately moving them to the alumni area of the database so that we can put them on our list and keep up with them there? Like Stephanie said, don't neglect your alumni. They're a huge potential source of new business. Of course, you've got all kinds of data. People are now running experience databases and website databases. Do we want the CRM to be the focal point of that data for our attorneys, or maybe not? But we've got data in all three places, so we have to kind of figure this out. Then we've got the less obvious sources. Worked with a big firm in New York, and we're talking about, they had a really good CRM implementation, but I was like, where is the data on your sponsorships? It's in a spreadsheet. Your alumni, spreadsheet. Your opportunities, spreadsheet. Whoa, we were done, and we had about 20 additional spreadsheets. Anything that you can do on a spreadsheet, pretty much, you can put it in the CRM system. We realized that 2 of the people that were keeping the spreadsheets were keeping them on their hard drives of their computers. If they left the organization, which by now I'm sure they have after last year, a lot of people have left, that information, nobody else has access to it. You can always get a spreadsheet out of the CRM, put the data in the CRM. And then, a big one is expenses. I keep I'm like a dog with a bone about when are we going to integrate Chrome River with the CRM so that at least we can capture business development activities. Everybody's asking for it. And I think the first CRM company that gets there is gonna really find that to be a big deal. And now we're even dealing with lots and lots of proposals. So lots and lots of data.
Chris, you've said a couple things as you walked through the data scenarios. So one of which you just alluded to very early on, which was the volume of data that's now available, and just the crush of information that we now have. So what we're seeing is that effect in the legal marketplace, and without the right strategy, and without the goals and objectives being clearly defined, too much data is almost as bad as having a bad data problem with what you have, because you can't get through it. So that strategy piece is really, really important. The assessment is really important, and relying on consultants and organizations like yours to help assist in that process is something that's just enormous. Another thing that I wanted to say is the role of data steward. We all grew up with interaction and tickets and things along those lines. So the perspective of the data steward was somebody that helps fix our data. We've seen that role shift to the point where those resources now are helping us to create better connections, to create more relationship intelligence out of the data we have, enriching the data, giving us that information that's critically important to these law offices. So the slide that's up on the screen now is just an example of some of the areas where we see firms around the world starting to gather information. So So obviously the people piece is something that we've always dealt with in the past. Prior employment, where was this person? And what track record did they get in their previous jobs? And every time a data steward sees last name, first name, middle initial, mobile phone, all the same, but the company name is different, or the URL for the email is different. What that means is there's 6 or 7 additional changes that are taking place with where they've moved for their job, who's taken over their job, where that person came from. So, so being able to understand and enrich that data becomes a pretty huge scenario. The whole categorization scenario, companies, we spend a lot of time talking about how not to put the real estate location, right, and the multifamily location mall down as the client name. I mean, just all that stuff has effects that are really difficult to power through. Industry information, the type of organization, private, publicly traded, who that company is owned by, sister companies, things along those lines. Revenues, billings, key contacts. So all of this information now can be easily enhanced, either by data that we got in-house or data that's now available via third-party web content that allows us to enrich this information. So, so we see a lot of sophisticated firms that are really going after as much of this data as they possibly can, connecting it up and making it available for people to be able to use as business intelligence. So, you also alluded to technology solutions. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure we point out is just in the last 3 years, there's been a huge evolution of the technology that's available to allow firms to handle the types of data issues that were commonplace years ago. So we're going to talk a little bit about some of these components in more detail as we work through the presentation. But there's a term that if you haven't heard it referred to as ERM, you'll also hear groups talk about advanced contact processing. So one of the largest challenges associated with a CRM implementation is the data piece, and the number one piece of data is contact information. So how do I get contacts that our firm and our users are dealing with? How do I get that contributed to the system? And this technology, again, which we'll cover here in a moment, is it's been unbelievable in the way it's helped to address that scenario and manage it and deal with the data quality and feed the information to the data stewards that they need to be able to make the right decisions. Data synchronization and integration. I would say that 9 out of 10 of our clients, global law firms, have siloed data spread across a number of different systems. So for us, being able to identify which systems this data sits in and identify how we're going to connect to that data, synchronize with the data, harvest the information, get it connected and normalized when it comes over to the new system, really important part of the CRM strategy. The next thing which we learned it through a group in London originally, this whole concept of activity and communication scoring. So when you mention keeping your data fresh, if we've got the ability to identify who's communicating with who, how they're communicating or meeting, and how often that's happening, we have the ability with today's technology to actually score that activity. So what firms have the ability to do is to take a look at a key group of clients or clients associated with a practice group and be able to identify what the trends are from an activity and a communication standpoint. So is our communications with our top 20 clients, is it trending up? Is it flat? Is it trending down? So really helpful information, because it doesn't require that anybody type any data into the system. It's all based on the data that's coming from the legacy systems. Microsoft's done a wonderful job with some technologies that they group under an area called cognitive services. And the concept of predictive analytics and machine learning and artificial intelligence in a simple way allow us to build rules and scripts and help to route and notify and alert people on changes in the database. So now somebody doesn't have to go check. Now we can have the system alert. So the technology is really advanced. It's usable. It's a viable scenario at this point. We talked a little bit about data harvesting. The technology associated with signature scraping is something that we're seeing adopted much more widely now, where somebody can actually have the system capture the signature from an email and then compare that to the data that's in the database. And if it's different, create a workflow or a notification. So again, it keeps the data fresh, keeps it updated, allows us to verify the data quality and have the data stewards help us understand if there's been a change and notify everybody of the change. And then I mentioned earlier, external content. And a day doesn't go by now that we don't get information on other services, some that are free, some that are subscription-based, where we've got the ability to enhance the data that we have in the system with really key information as it relates to the CRM database. So here we go. So this is a technology, and it's not designed to be propaganda by any stretch of the imagination, but just to help everybody understand. We got Elite or Aderant or Dynamics Finance and Operations accounting systems. There's really valuable data there. We've got our websites, we've got our e-marketing platforms, we've got the HR staffing databases, we've got case and matter management systems, we've got new business intake, related party databases. We have all this information that we've spent so much money putting systems in place to be able to support. If we can capture that information and leverage that information to strengthen the intelligence associated with our CRM database, it represents a huge win for the firm. So, what we've seen a lot of is technology we use is called Sync360, and these pre-built connectors that allow our teams to be able to connect up to those legacy systems that sit in law firms and to extract the information and pump it into the database. So now all of a sudden, we've got contacts along with clients and matters and practice groups and geos and industries and types of companies, and it begins to evolve into what outside of the legal market they call business intelligence. The other piece that we'll talk about is the ERM piece, the technology that sits right next to either Office 365 or Outlook with Exchange Server. And what that does is it monitors to see who I'm communicating with. And back in the old days, it would capture everybody I'm communicating with and just send me a massive volume of potential contact information, which didn't take too long for it to become overwhelming. So now what happens is we got the ability to use the scoring technology. Some cases people refer to it as gamification. So I can say, when my communications with Chris reaches a certain level, I'd like you to propose that I add Chris to my CRM database. So you don't get massive volumes, you just get the strategic connections. In some cases, those connections are personal contacts. And you got the ability to say, I don't want to track that person into the system. But in most cases, if there's somebody that I'm communicating with from the business email address on a regular basis, I really want to be able to have that person contributed to the system. So when I make that contribution from the system, it leverages signature scraping. It captures the information. It asks me, is this somebody I want to contribute? If I contribute it, it launches a data quality scenario. So is that person in the system? Is the information that's being posted to the system the same? If it's not, I want you to send that to somebody, a data steward of some sort, that can help figure out, is it the same person? Is it a different person? And is the information accurate? And of course, LinkedIn is a huge part of these solutions these days. So Microsoft, with their acquisition there, has made it really easy for me to take a look at a record and compare it to LinkedIn and verify where the information goes. So what happens is this data is harvested, it's pumped into the system, it's already normalized. Now I can take that information and I can view it from a number of different perspectives. I can view it from a marketing standpoint for campaigns and events and mailing lists. I can look at it from a practice group standpoint, from a client team or an industry team, from a white space business development opportunity tracking. So, so all that data now becomes available to me to use again as business intelligence. So let's go. Let's talk for a minute about the ERM technology. I've already touched on it a little bit, and I don't want to beat this one too hard, but it's something that really creates an easy win for law firms these days. So what you got the ability to do is to connect up to that Outlook and go through the process that I mentioned just a few minutes ago. And the benefits associated with this process are enormous. So one, it's really difficult not to capture important contacts. And then once that contact is identified, what these technologies allow firms to do is to identify those key contacts, connect them to the user or the employee at the firm, connect that contact to a company, identify whether that company is a client, and then what matters, instructions, what cases, transactions have we handled for that client, and then which of our offices, which of our practice groups, which of our fee earners have been involved. So from that standpoint, we now have the ability to get a multidimensional relationship intelligence scenario based on data that's been pulled into the system using this ERM technology. So with that, let's shift over to, this is a concept that just over the last 6 months has really accelerated. And the challenge has been, if I turn on ERM, I turn on data harvesting, I start pulling information in from these other systems, how long does it take for me to build out a viable database? So what the technologists have figured out is we can actually take historic PST files from Outlook, and it can be pre-processed and compared to Outlook contacts and existing legacy databases and things along those lines. But what I can do by user is I can go through and take the previous year's Outlook data, process it offline, and identify the proposed contacts that have reached that certain level on the gamification scale. You know, who's got a score of 25 or 50 or whatever the number is that we decided. So for me as a fee earner now, before the system goes live, before it's active, I get a list in an Excel format that shows me, based on my last year's activity, who should be the contacts that I have in the system and how strong is my activity, communications, and meeting relationship with those contacts. And having that information to post into the system creates the foundation for the next piece, which is when I add additional users with their contacts, I now begin to build essentially my in-house LinkedIn. So it shows one contact connected to many people at the firm, and it shows the company, whether that's a client, whether we've done transactions with that client, and then who's worked on those. And then now I can see the activity level associated with those, so I can get some really valuable information. So, so this advanced contact onboarding, I put an example in here that's helpful. So the next slide actually shows an example of the improvement associated with the number of contacts by fee earner. So I took a sample here of 5 lawyers on a project that we did just recently. We scraped 725,000 emails and appointments. And by lawyer, what we did is we identified the number of contacts that they had in the previous system. And then after processing, we identified the number of contacts that they should have had in the system based on this ERM process. So you'll notice lawyer 1 goes from 21 to 112, from 8 to 52, 26 to 104. So what happens is through this automated contact onboarding process, we don't have to rely on people contributing information. Now we have the ability, based on their day-to-day workflow, to identify who they're connected with and how strong those relationships are. So it's not unusual for us to have 100+% increase in the number of contacts. But the thing that's more important, back to Chris's point at the start of the presentation, the quality of the data, because we're using information from their email signatures and we're looking at it on a transaction by transaction basis. The technology actually helps us get better data, much more accurate data, much more timely data, and then much more quality data because of the ability for us to enrich that information. So Chris, it's a little bit about the technology that we're starting to see firms leverage. From your standpoint, you help groups with best practices and determine what sort of resources they need and things along those lines. So would you mind jumping in?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I think one other thing to sort of add to your last slide, Whit, is when you have the ERM, the signature captured data, it also helps with ongoing data stewarding, making it much quicker, because then you don't have to go out to LinkedIn. You don't have to go out to a website. You have the signature block right there. And so anything we can do to automate that process is great. We recommend ERM for pretty much all of our clients now. In terms of best practices going forward, how do you deal with all this data? You know, the first thing obviously is to start with a strategy. The most important thing after that is allocate the resources. We've talked at the first session that we did. You've got to be able to dedicate time, money, and people. And then let's add to that also processes, putting those in place to accurately and adequately deal with the data. Minimize the bad data coming in, maximize the efficiency and the speed and the accuracy of the data once it's there. Training users is important. Communicating effectively with the users about why it's important so they care. That's a big part of CRM. Making sure you have the right number of internal or externally outsourced data stewards. And then of course, we talked about creating a style and standard guide. And then I've got some firms that have been really successful, sometimes getting the assistants involved in regularly cleaning up the lists. That's a big pain point for the attorneys, is they really don't want to do it, but they also want to make sure the right people are getting the right information. You know, before COVID, when people were in the office, they'd do a big pizza party luncheon and get a bunch of terminals set up in a room, and everybody would sort of sit there and play and try cleaning up the lists or enhancing people's Outlook contacts. I think there's a lot of ways you can still do that. I've seen folks do, you know, mailing boxes of goodies to people and all getting together and having kind of a social and going in and working on the data. So a lot of things that you could do in the office, you can now do remotely. Okay, next slide. So this is a lot. I know it's a lot, but again, don't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Work on small, manageable projects. Don't try to boil the ocean, as one of my clients said. Figure out the low-hanging fruit. One data source, top clients, one list, you know, preferably the list for the event next week. You can get one group very engaged if it's something they care about, if it's their event or their newsletter or their alert about to go out the door. I just heard a firm yesterday that said we trained a key assistant in each office to be able to help the others understand, you know, sort of how to use the system and how to make sure that we got our data good, to be sort of the point person. Start with an assessment. Assess the mess to figure out what it's going to take, and then break it down into manageable pieces, starting with the most valuable, where you're going to get the most ROI, starting with that data first. And then use metrics to measure results. People don't often think about the implications of bad data, which is why I shared all those stats. Obviously, we're going to have the slides available, so you'll have access to those. But people need to see it measured. You know, you go to your attorneys and you're like, we need a data steward. Well, what does that cost? Cost is one thing, sure, but what's the value of that? To be able to quantify, and I've told people simple things like keep a little pad by your desk, and every time you run into a data related issue, write it down, because we don't remember it. And at the end of a month or two, you will see there's a lot of different things that bad data is causing you problems with, and attorney complaints related to bad data. And you can then use that to make your case for, you know, automated and manual processing and data quality tools to get your data better. Create and disseminate your style guide. Happy to help anybody do that. It's something that we do all the time. And get wins, communicate successes, repeat. You know, we had one group wanted to get something out the door, couldn't get it out the door, lots of complaints about it. We focused the data stewards on that list. Actually, we have a lot of clients now. We had a client that was running all of their lists, having our data stewards look at them before the mailing. And I said, why are we looking at the same list over and over and over? And they explained, we didn't want to deal with bounces after. We wanted to clean up the bounces before so that the people actually got the communication. Well, so we now have an automated process. We can quickly and easily run that list through for no money, really inexpensively, and then figure out which ones are bounces and then only data steward the bounces. So I'll figure out the right strategies. We also have a data quality white paper on our website. We will get you the ability, if you put your name into the chat and you'd like a copy of that white paper, happy to get you that. It's called Data Quality Domino Effect, and all the different connectivities of the data, and you know, it's just sort of like dominoes. So, and some really good strategies to clean it up. But just remember that just like CRM, you know, data is an ongoing thing. You can't just focus on it once. It's got to be an ongoing strategy, and it never ends really. But the good news is that means you've got forever to get better at it.
The train never stops, Chris. It just keeps going.
It never was.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important process for everybody to understand, is that, you know, it's not an advanced strategy. It's a strategy that has to be woven directly into the fabric of what you're doing with this type of technology and this type of an implementation. And if you do that, then, you know, it creates a really healthy data solution.
And I think we left off this slide. Reach out for help. Feel free to call. Whit and I will take a call anytime. Always happy to help, share information, ideas, best practices. Just reach out. But I think we always get a lot when we talk to the audience too. So let's go to our next slide. I think we've talked through a lot of these, but really important. Again, you'll get the slides. If you want more information on data quality, you can subscribe to crmsuccess.net. That's our e-marketing and CRM and data quality e-newsletter. Lots of good tips there. Again, reach out for help and don't do it alone. But let's take some questions from the audience, because it's always great. They always pull up some interesting topics that we hadn't thought about, and we can all learn from each other here. Whit and I will definitely stay on and answer a few questions, and we might even stay a little later. I think we do have one question that I saw earlier from Bob, and Chris mentioned not pulling contacts from attorneys from the Outlook contacts. If not there, where would the source of contacts come from? For instance, when a lateral joins the firm, you know, they want to get out their new attorney newsletter or their new attorney announcement. What's your strategy for that?
Yeah, so unfortunately, the value or the quality of the data that's in Outlook these days just isn't kept up because of that type ahead process you mentioned earlier. But it does give a place to start. So a lot of times what we'll do is we'll use that core data that's available in Outlook or lists that come in from the lateral as the foundation for the contacts that we want to bring into the system. And more often than not, when those contacts get introduced into the firm's system, we have the ability now to check to see if anybody else in the firm is connected to those contacts. And of course, with the right data strategy, we get good quality data for those contacts. So it just creates a new relationship or a new marketing relationship. So, so aside from harvesting and gathering this information, the analysis, the verification, the comparing the data to the legacy data that's available is something that's really important. So.
Indeed. Amelia, I think we had some other questions as well, didn't we?
Yes, a couple came through. We have a question that says, what do you recommend are some of the best ways to clean up a firm's data?
Yeah, I think some of the strategies we've already talked about, there's automated data cleaning and manual data cleaning, having an ERM to make life a lot easier, using internal staff or external. There's a lot of different methodologies that you can go through. And again, if somebody needs has additional comments or wants to get really in the weeds, feel free to call. Happy to talk about that anytime.
Hey, Chris, trying to run from it is just a recipe for disaster, right? So, you know, if you don't feel comfortable with your data, call for help. And, you know, you don't have to boil the ocean. You know, just start with the basics, get some early wins, develop some momentum, start with a subset of information, and build out the model, build out the formula, document it, and then expand on it. But trying to cover this thing and boil the entire ocean is really a challenge, and it can be overwhelming. So look for help. And
start with a pail. Go get the little red pail and take it down to the.
Yeah, exactly. So, and that pail becomes really, really valuable. Right?
Indeed. By the way, while we wait for the next question, I don't know if everybody's familiar, but these are LinkedIn QR codes. So if you'd like to connect with either me or Whit, if you just pull your camera out and take a quick snap of these, it'll auto connect you to us on LinkedIn. Amelia, what else you got for us?
Okay, another one we've got is, how do small and mid-sized firms go about cleaning their data if they don't have the internal resources?
Yeah, Stephanie sort of alluded to that at the very beginning of the session. Again, there are lots of different methodologies, automated and manual. There are external resources. Our data team, most of our clients, about half of our clients are small and mid-sized. So you don't have to, get or pay for a 40-hour-a-week data steward. Small firms just can't muster those resources, but you can get 5 hours a week, which can actually, for a smaller firm, make a huge difference. What do you think?
Sorry, Chris, I was looking at the next one and I got all excited about it. So.
Well, go ahead.
Yeah, so the next question is, what do you suggest when attorneys won't share their contacts?
That's one of my favorite questions ever, because back in the old days, it was really a challenge. How do you tell a senior partner, we really want you to contribute your contacts when they push back? But now the value of the CRM databases, the ERM, the data harvesting and capturing, now what we have the ability to do is to take the contacts from somebody that's not interested in sharing and share back with them the number of other individuals, other employees at the firm that are connected with that person. So Whit, I know you don't want to share your contact information, but those top 3 people have an average of 75 other employees of the firm connected to them. And they're capturing the communications and capturing the activity. So by you not being connected, it really creates a challenge for the marketing relationship associated with you and your important clients. So now we have data that we can use to show them how important it is for them to share the information.
And if they don't share the fact that they have a relationship, nobody knows that they have it, so they can't respect it. So people are going to pick up the phone, they're going to send them an email because they don't know that they're your client, that you have a strong relationship. All right. Well, I think this was some great information today. Again, if you have additional questions or you want to get in the weeds, feel free to reach out to Whit or I anytime. And Amelia, if you can jump to that last slide. We've also got some information. Again, this is the white paper that I mentioned. It's called the Data Quality Domino Effect. Some people have already sent their emails on in the questions area, the chat area, and we'll send it to you. it's got some really good tips along with a lot more of these statistics that you can use to advance the data quality cause at your firm.
And if anybody has additional questions, email us. And we'd be happy to respond back and potentially incorporate it into upcoming seminars. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Everybody have a good afternoon.